the new standards for compliance-ready contact solutions. All lines will be placed on mute to prevent any background noise. Tom Miller, Josh Wilsey, you can begin your webinar.
Thank you, Darche. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking some time today to join our webinar. My name is Tom Miller, and I'm the Vice President of Analytics at Noble Systems. Today I'm joined by Josh Wilsey, Solutions Engineer here at Noble Systems. And I'll now turn it over to Josh to introduce himself and get us started on today's presentation.
All right, thanks a lot, Tom. Again, my name is Josh Wilsey, Solutions Engineer with Noble Systems. And today we're going to spend a little bit of time talking specifically about compliance and compliance with the TCPA. So let's go ahead and get started with that now. So the recent ruling by the FCC regarding interpretation of TCPA brought about lots of questions and concerns for all of our outbound contact center customers over multiple industries, over any industry that basically makes those outbound phone calls. Over the last few weeks, that's been kind of a shifting situation. And today's webinar is intended to provide some understanding of how Noble Systems products and solutions for TCPA can help our customers maintain compliance with a shifting legal landscape while still maintaining all of their productivity goals. So those that are interested in a detailed discussion of the recent FCC ruling should also tune into our upcoming webinar featuring Jim Noble Jr., our President and CEO here at Noble Systems, as well as Carl Kosser, our Chief Compliance Counsel at Noble Systems. So it's going to be happening shortly in the future. So stay tuned for that, and we'll get you that information for a more detailed legal analysis of the FCC ruling. So today, what we want to do is spend some time discussing common issues, common concerns, some old concerns, some are brand new with the new recent ruling, right? And some of the ways that Noble Systems solutions can give you a little bit of peace of mind around contact center compliance and dialing mobile phones and TCPA. So as we get started here, we have a few questions that we're gonna look at as far as compliance concerns, right? You can see a list of them on screen now. We're gonna go through them one at a time. So I'll go ahead and go through them. So first and foremost, right, we want to talk about how our contact centers filtering their lists and records to maintain compliance with the TCPA. That first concern really is about separating your data into, gaining that intelligence and knowledge of which phone numbers fall into what category, right? Which ones you can dial and by what method, right? So Noble Systems actually offers a wireless phone scrubbing service. This is pretty new, all right? We now do offer services for scrubbing wireless phones. We have a service essentially allowing you to upload your list to our servers here at Noble Systems. Each individual phone record it gets tagged with an appropriate compliance status. So that compliance status could include that it's a wireline phone or a landline phone, that it's on the wireless portability list, right? So it's definitely a wireless number. Could be on a wireless block list or a reserved list of wireless numbers from the carrier. Also, it could be a part of a litigator's database or numbers that are known to be a part of a class action lawsuit, right? So essentially, we're giving you the tool to send us your data, send us your list of phone numbers, and we'll return a status for that wireless portability and whether or not that number is wireless or not. One of the key things that's changed, that's been clarified by the ruling this month, was the concept of consent and revocation of consent, right? So just like you could always use your Noble tools to maintain knowledge at the contact center level of your current consent status, individuals that revoke their consent status can be placed into exclusion lists, since they won't be dialed by your automated systems, right? Because you're dialing automated records for your consenting wireless phones. In that case, we can either use an exclusion list. You could use a status code and put it in a QBE. There's a lot of free by example. There are several ways that one might avoid calling someone if they've revoked their consent. The key is to either have that done on a phone call, right, where if they revoke consent over a phone call, we can do it with a status code, but to have other back-end ways and systems, whether it's by email or just a back-end system where the customer can revoke consent up from multiple channels. That's something that's important, that if you tune into the future webinar with Jim Noble and Carl Koster, there are a lot of concerns specifically around how someone revokes consent. And really, at the end of the day, it appears that, in whatever method they revoke consent, you're going to need to be able to add them to one of these exclusion lists, which, that's something that that Noble Tools can help you with, whether it's just our standard tools out of the box with for exclusion lists and QBEs, query by example, or if it's utilizing something like our Noble Contact Insert service to push a record into an exclusion list from a back-end system. So if you want more information about those kind of tools, you can talk to your salesperson, your sales engineer. We'll be more than happy to break down how those kind of tools can be used to maintain that consent status. So a second question that we want to talk about here. So what systems are used to place mobile phone calls, and how are those mobile phone calls placed, right? So how are we placing calls to mobile numbers? So this is something that until the current July ruling, there's been a lot of different talk and a lot of different solutions placed out there by both Noble and other competitors. Noble has the entire time had one unified solution that we believe is the best, most compliant solution. That's what we're going to talk about today. But let's take a look at a couple of different types of solutions that are out there in the market and how those affect compliance status and what's the best and what are the shortcomings of other systems. So if we're talking about PBX-based solutions, I have a lot of customers of mine that have, up until the recent July ruling, had opted to simply use a PBX for calling mobile phone records, right? They would like to use a PBX, and that's what they went with. And we have a lot of, we hear a lot of people saying, well, just to have them pick up their phone and dial those manually. The problem with utilizing a PBX for mobile phone dialing, the real compliance risk for using a PBX doesn't necessarily fall along the lines of your TCPA concerns, but it's every other compliance risk that you have in your contact center, right? Your do not call list, your maximum attempt rules, time zone windows, calling windows. All of those things are concerns for compliance reasons that you have day to day in your normal automated contact center, that if you're on a PBX that isn't connected and integrated with your contact center, you're not going to be able to get to. One other thing to note is that calls from your separate PBX infrastructure are typically not able to provide the same level of reporting, agent status indication, alerting. All of the Harmony tools that we use day to day aren't available in that type of an environment. So the unified interface for reporting and recording is a big plus of not using, a big reason not to use a PBX by itself. We've had other systems that use a predictive dialer system where they've just removed the ability for that system to place predictive outbound calls, right? They've just removed the piece that allows that. And I would think that a big problem with a removal of that capacity is that you're demonstrating very clearly that it has the potential, the capacity to be an automatic dialing system, right? If you look at a predictive dialer without the predictive dialer software, it's obvious to see that you could add that predictive software back in. So you're not really making a manual dial from a system that's incapable of ever being an auto dialer. It has been in the past, so you're stripping away something there that's you're really not meeting the test put forward by the July ruling, which again, if you want details on that, I would stress attending our next webinar with Jim Noble and Carl Koster. Essentially, in this environment, you don't meet the test for automatic and predictive dialing, and whether, depending on the predictive dialer solution being used, you may meet the test for all of your other compliance concerns. But let's just move forward and talk about the Noble TCPA solution, our patented solution for manual dialing of mobile phone records, right? It works in a very simple way. Just like the other PBX-based systems, your agent's going to pick up a phone and dial a number digit by digit, right? The difference comes in where our Noble TCPA server is going to query your contact center database applications to determine the compliance status of the phone number you're dialing. It's not only going to determine the compliance status, it's going to ensure that you're dialing the correct number, right? So if you mess up the number when you're dialing it, it's going to catch that, and it's not going to allow you to dial that number. So the contact center application is configured to check rules and give basically a yes or no answer to whether or not you're allowed to dial that number. If the number is okay to dial, the Noble Contact Center with compliance criteria gives it the okay to go ahead and dial that number. The system creates a connection back to the compliance contact center there, giving you the ability to do screen pops, call recording, agent status, and a full suite of reports that are available for Noble, all work across all of these, all your applications. So the TCPA server then, after you've got consent to make the phone call from the compliance criteria held in the contact center application, and you've synchronized your agent status and reports and recording information, the TCPA server pushes the call out to the PSTN to a wireless number. And since the agent's already connected, there's no way to play a hold message or to have a drop ratio or anything like that. It's not a predictive dialing system. And the best part about it is the Noble TCPA server never was a predictive dialing system. So you don't have that question of, did you remove predictive capacity from a predictive dialer to make a TCPA server? It was never a predictive dialer system, so you don't have that question. So that really feeds into the next piece of information we want to discuss. How can we be sure that the calls we're making originate on a device that doesn't have the potential capacity to dial automatically, right? And this is very key to the most recent ruling. So Noble Systems set to offer a new solution to handle the problem of potential capacity. So our Noble Manual Dial Compliance Server, our TCPA server in the last diagram, is going to optionally be configured, if you so choose, with a lockdown functionality. The lockdown functionality is going to be sit on the server and ensure that there's no tampering or additional software being installed on that server. So in that event, no software can be added to, no software can be altered to create an automated dialer out of the existing TCPA manual dial server. Right? So essentially, no software is going to be added that can allow you to make automated phone calls, store automatically, or automatically dial numbers from a list, or generate numbers. So in this event as well, with this lockdown functionality, Noble Systems would contractually commit that we would not allow our own engineers and our own folks to put any software on that system, and we would never put any software on that system that could do those functions, automated dialing, number generation, or the storage. So we would have a system that was tamper-proof. It would shut itself down if any outside code was written, and we would never create an automated dialer out of that system. So really, we're just trying to take a proactive approach to the question of potential capacity with this. So again, we've covered this a little bit with the diagram already, but I want to stress a couple of items. So how to manage additional compliance concerns on calls dialed on a manual solution, right? So your TCPA solution from Noble Systems checks against its unified contact center compliance application and verifies account level status for a record for all of our typical compliance concerns. All the things you care about on a day-to-day basis, time zones, calling windows, delays between attempts, maximum attempts, all that stuff. The last question here I have before I hand it off to Tom, where are recordings stored for manual calls, and how is the agent time tracked and center productivity tracked? Essentially, we talked about it. We already have that connection back to the contact center application. We know when the agent is connected to the call. We're able to screen pop the correct record on the contact center side. We're able to provide wallboard statistics and information to Harmony. Your web reports will be able to track statistics and metrics for manual enabled agents. And your call recordings are all put in the same place. So Harmony recording search, Harmony quality assurance utilities all work in the same way that they do today with a predictive outbound system. So the final question here we have that we want to talk a little while about is how can we use data analytics to maximize our productivity in a manual environment? To answer that question, I'm going to hand it off to Tom Miller.
Thanks, Josh. So as we think about TCPA and analytics, this question of how does analytics play a role and what does that role look like? I think the first point is there's literally nothing about the TCPA regulation that's helping a contact center operation with productivity. It's not designed to do it, and quite frankly, it's creating environments where the elimination of automation, again, going to more manual dialing and more manual process environments really puts a lot of pressure from an operational perspective to maintain some level of productivity. I think the big challenge is that regardless of what regulations have continued to roll out here, the business goals don't change. So if you're in the business to collect delinquent dollars, or you're in the business through an inside sales or a telemarketing operation to be able to sell more product and convert more offers, or maybe even just providing better outbound service, you still need to meet all those objectives. But again, you're going to do it in an environment today where you have some of these productivity challenges. Now, what we see is that leading companies that we work with are, in fact, finding ways to get it done. And I think there's absolutely an opportunity to find pickups and lifts in productivity, as well as, frankly, improving the customer experience of the prospect or the customer that you're calling, and along the way remain compliant, and importantly remain compliant within this new TCPA environment. The environment today from a regulatory perspective, and particularly when we think about how we're handling some of these no consent mobile phone calls, it's a perfect environment to take advantage of call targeting through the use of analytics. And some of these factors, you sort of the cost of calling increases as you get into these manual environments. You're making fewer calls per agent typically. Typically you have lower penetration rates, or you're more limited on the attempts that you're making per record or on average across the list. And so a lot of those factors tend to be the ones that drive really significant benefit in using call targeting. And as you think of call targeting, and this is from experience in working with literally dozens of companies, there's really two ways to approach the problem of how do you get people on the phone in a more efficient and effective way. One is what I describe as an operational approach. And I think we've spent the beginning part of this webinar talking about our operational solutions around compliance. And there's certainly an operational approach to try to find the best times and best opportunities to contact the people you need to reach. Certainly you can gather lots and lots of calling history. So theoretically, if you could call every single account, every single hour of the day, every day of the week, and on every phone number that they have, and you can do it enough times that you have some significance, some statistical significance in how that's occurring, then that certainly would put you in a position to understand when people answer the phone and they don't. Problem is it's literally impractical on anybody's list to think that you're going to have that much calling across the full spectrum of days and time periods and phone numbers. And so what happened is you have lots and lots of gaps in what that looks like. There may be a few times where you've had some experience, you can draw some conclusions, but by and large, it tends to be pretty hit and miss. And I bring that up because we take an analytic approach, and I think an analytic approach to this problem really works well and provides a lot of consistent benefit as a result of the approach. And so by using analytics, got the ability to estimate the contactability of customers based on the experience of similar customers that you are calling or similar prospects that you're calling, and based on the specific experience of your agents. So because you have a number of individuals that you've attempted and sometimes successfully contacted in the prior weeks or the prior months, that provides an ability to leverage that information to make a pretty good estimate when you have new records that come through each day as to whether you can get them on the phone at various hours of the day. The analogy that I like to make is it's exactly like credit score. So if you think about the FICO score, the credit bureau scores that are used to approve most people for auto loans, mortgage loans, credit cards, etc., banks don't need to have direct experience with you charging off or going severely delinquent on a loan in order to have a very accurate assessment of your risk, your credit risk, your risk of paying them back. And they don't need that direct experience with you because they have lots of experience with people very similar to you. And they can draw on that from an analytic perspective to make good estimates. We take the same approach and do the same thing with our contactability scores. So the application that I'll talk about here, and this is our compliant analytic application in Calltech, is addressing a few challenges in call targeting. The first is when to call customers. And so what we're doing with our solution is we are predicting the likelihood that each individual you have an opportunity to call on a given day, that we're estimating the likelihood that they will answer the phone in every hour that you have staff available. And we do that by creating within the Calltech system a series of models that predict right party and wrong party contact. And those models are taking advantage of two fundamental sources of data. They're looking at the prior calling history information. So every single day of all the dials that are made, we'll bring that information, the results of those dials, back into the Calltech system. We'll summarize those on an individual level, creating a calling history database that typically goes back over 4 or 6 months. And then from that, we're configuring maybe 300 different characteristics about somebody's calling history. So how many right party contacts between 8 and 10 a.m. at the home number in the past week? How many in the past 2 weeks? How many in the past month? What's the date of left message, etc. So we create all those different characteristics that then form a profile of somebody's calling history. And in conjunction with that, we look at any of the available information on the record. Perhaps that's presence of phone numbers or days and dollars delinquent. Perhaps it's information about their prior buying behavior. Could be scores. And so all that sort of serves up as the profile of that individual at that point in time. And the modeling within Calltech is then estimating right party and wrong party contact. Those models are rebuilt frequently, so you have changes in seasonality, certainly around tax season, the end-of-year holidays, summer vacations, etc., are all picked up in the estimates because people's contactability changes. And so these models are systemically and automatically being rebuilt, typically on a weekly or monthly basis. In addition to just predicting contactability, we're also predicting the likelihood that that right party contact has a successful outcome. So again, if you're selling product, that successful outcome is probably conversion to a sale. If you're collecting delinquent dollars, it could be a promise of payment. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So the next major question that the Calltex system is helping to answer is who to call. Because most times, customers are not, from a business strategy perspective, just focusing on those people most easy to get. It isn't the ideal strategy. Typically, there's some other important business metric that our customers want to incorporate into how they're prioritizing the individuals they're focusing on. So I mentioned before, the Calltex system will predict or will create custom response models or custom promise of payment models. So that's a customized risk model or behavior score that's being developed in the system and can be used to help create the priority of who you're actually focusing your calling on. So again, typically we'll see different business metrics. If it's a sales environment, it's a lot of focus on which accounts not only will answer the phone, but which accounts are more likely to purchase the product or service that you're selling. If it's a collections environment, not only those that are likely to answer the phone, but also those that may have a higher balance, a higher risk, or perhaps a higher probability of payment. And so our customers can use that to create customized calling strategies specific to their campaign to make sure that they're getting the best result. And then the final, flip the slide, the final question that Calltex is helping customers answer is where to call, or more specifically, which number to call. And again, going back to TCPA and some of the compliance challenges that we have, because that regulation is essentially forcing outbound operations to handle the calling of non-consent mobile phones in a different way than landline or those in which you have consent, because you have a different process, it certainly from an analytic perspective makes us think about, hey, is there an opportunity to break that down and get a little bit more specific with how we're estimating contact? Our customers are having to make operational differences in how they're handling these manual dial cell phones. Is there an opportunity to bring analytics down an additional level and get even more specific about how we're doing it? And I think for most of you, the presence of mobile phone on all of your files is fairly significant today. I mean, in some cases, it may be 100% mobile phones. It may be largely mobile phones. But I think we all see that change in proportion between landline and mobile. And so for a lot of those reasons, we really focused on taking this product to the next level and understanding where to call. And to do that, because we're an analytic shop, we want to do research and we want to understand it. We want to get data. We want to look at information. Exactly what we did. So we analyzed literally millions of mobile and landline calls from an analytic research perspective to really understand are there opportunities to apply analytics and help our customers here, and can we do it effectively? What we found, the results of this analysis were pretty interesting. Maybe as most people would expect, the contact rate on mobile phones was significantly higher than the contact rate on landline phones. We looked at it in a variety of different perspectives at different times of day, different days a week, and a lot of that trend would continue to stay. That said, even though the mobile phone contact rates were significantly higher, it didn't really completely solve the problem. So even if it was 50% higher, it's still less than a 10%, in many cases 8 or 6% RPC rates, which means there's still a need to be able to target these accounts, to be able to use analytics to understand when they're going to answer the phone, because even though they're higher, it's still a relatively low contact rate. But what we were able to prove through the modeling applications is we could effectively estimate contactability of a mobile phone on its own, and we can estimate the contactability of landline phones on their own. And so as a result of that analysis, we've introduced a new module that seamlessly integrates with the Calltex system, which we call the Total Contact module. And with Total Contact, we're doing just that. We're building separate sets of analytic models to estimate the contact on a mobile phone versus a landline phone. And we're able to present essentially side-by-side estimates of that contactability, which, as a customer that may be handling cell phone non-consent mobile phones in a manual way, we can actually produce two completely parallel and separate calling schedules and calling priorities. So we can set you up to be as successful as you can possibly be, whether you're dialing landlines or consented mobile phones in more of a predictive preview mode, or whether in more of a classic manual mode. We're also able to successfully estimate that contact and provide an effective relative calling order for all those records, so that the agents are making sure that they're not only calling the people at the best time, but calling the best prioritized manual records at that point. Okay, and I think, Josh, that now takes us to the Q&A portion of our webinar. And I know we received a number of questions coming into this webinar, and Josh, maybe I'll turn it back to you. Sure. To start to address.
Sure, and yeah, we don't have time, unfortunately, to address every question we received, but we did receive a number of them. So I'll just take a couple of them right off the top here. Are phone calls made to cell phones using a campaign programmed in pre-dial, are they a violation of the TCPA? And the short answer to that is that is a great question for your legal counsel, first of all. And it's a great question that you should tune into our webinar featuring our chief counsel, Carl Koster, to get a little more detail on. I believe that the requirements for manually dialing are a little tighter, or are being interpreted a little bit more stringent than once thought based on the latest rulings. But again, that is a question that I think the next webinar will be addressing at length, and your counsel should weigh in on. Here's another one. How can we stay compliant with the FCC regulations when they're still using an older Noble system platform and theirs happens to be character-based? So someone on legacy systems from Noble, how do they stay compliant? Well, I can't speak to every legacy system, but there are many older clients from Noble Systems that have older systems that simply need to purchase the TCPA compliance package, essentially, to add on to their existing applications. It may require some updates to the software base on their systems, and depending on the age of their system, there is a potential for upgrade. But I think for the most part, most people will be able to buy that and get the subsequent updates to the versions of code they already have to integrate their contact center compliance pieces and their front-end applications, things like that, to allow that. So also note that if they are character-based and they are using an older system and they don't want to get rid of that, Noble Systems TCPA compliance service or application is also available as a standalone piece. You can purchase a piece that stands by itself and just dials wireless mobile phones, as opposed to a system that would dial predictably using maybe an older system you don't want to change out, or if you didn't want to mess with. But I think you should get with your salesperson, and that your salesperson can bring in your solutions engineer, what I do day to day, and we can look at what you have today and create a solution around that that's the best way to move forward to be compliant under this new landscape for TCP regulations. Hey, Tom, were there any call tech questions that stood out to you that you'd like to address, or analytics related?
Yeah, actually, there's a couple here. So one of them states that as a Noble customer not using the so if you use a dialer, I guess, other than Noble, is an opportunity for the analytic applications. The answer is yes. If you happen to be on different dialing platforms, there's absolutely an opportunity. We've got integration points into a variety of different dialing platforms, and we're happy to sort of take you through that. Second question on the call tech side was a little bit broader on just how call tech can help with compliance, and I think I addressed that in the presentation just by the fact that call tech, a couple different ways, I guess. One is call tech's ability to allow you or enable you to get to a customer more quickly with fewer attempts. So obviously that's a kind of a significant benefit from a regulatory perspective on reaching customers quickly, maybe on a first or second attempt, and not having the phone ring a lot, which tends to be where a lot of those lawsuits come into play. So call tech is helping to cut down on some of the regulatory risk from that perspective. I think the other thing that has been interesting to me, a lot of our customers have been taking advantage of the prior call history database to set multi-day call limitations. And so that's a little bit less TCPA oriented, maybe even external regulation oriented. But it's absolutely like an internal compliance point. So, and again, I've seen this with a lot of financial service companies, which, you know, maybe it's not an issue for them to be calling the same account, same customer 3 times in a single day, but if they call that customer 3 times a day for 100 days, then that becomes a problem. And so they're using the call history database to be able to set up what they think are reasonable customer experience thresholds at a week, 2 weeks, a month, et cetera. And so again, I think that's a good example where you're taking advantage of data to help, in that case, not only improve better internal regulatory compliance, but also improve the customer experience.
All right, great. A couple of questions in here about other types of compliance, things like do not call, PCI compliance, recording dual consent states. There's several questions along those lines. For anything that's related to a compliance concern, the Noble Systems on our predictive outbound side handles, we can, you know, with the solution for TCPA, as we covered earlier, all of those compliance concerns are handled in the exact same way on the manual side, because we have the same tracking of information and the same compliance criteria applied on the mobile dial, the mobile phone dial before it goes out into the world. So just want to make that clear that anything like dual consent recording or anything like that, we can handle those types of challenges in the same way that we do on our standard Noble predictive solution. So I think that's just about all the time we have for today. I want to thank everybody for joining us in the webinar today. Have a great day, and get in touch with your sales account manager, your salesperson, or your solutions engineer for more information about Noble TCPA products and Calltech Mobile. Have a great day.
Thank you very much.